Over there? All right.
Pueden hacerle preguntas, comentarios directamente a él. Él va a tener aproximadamente de 2 a 5 minutos con cada grupo. Pueden aprovechar para alguna pregunta, duda o comentario directamente.
All right. So sound is on. I think I'm here to answer questions.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments?
What kind of structure do you have to?
Okay. There's rules here.
No, I'm just asking what kind of structure do you have to design this theory?
Structure to design the theory. Could you clarify a little bit?
Well, do you give tests? How do you evaluate?
Oh, okay. So you're looking more so at evaluation.
Well, yes.
Okay. We've looked at different ways of delivery, courses online and open courses where we're trying to evaluate student interaction, and we're relying a lot on the fact that students are effective learners naturally. I mean, it's one of our most natural skills. From the time we're born, we're learning, we're connecting. The evaluation says more about the goal than about the learning process, right? So really, when you talk about evaluation, you're really trying to say how much progress have we made toward a particular goal. And so this gets back to what I mentioned earlier about this patterning sense, where we match the state of a learner and we reflect our understanding through our writings, through our discussions, through our language. So the challenge then is to define what does it require to be knowledgeable in a domain and how do you match those two. I'm not a huge fan of grading because I think grading is not a very effective system necessarily, but I do understand the value of accreditation, that's systemic. And I wouldn't really care if somebody, do you want, a doctor that was 78% effective in school? You know what I mean? I think the goal is you have it or you don't. You're competent and knowledgeable or you're not. On a percentage basis, it doesn't make much sense to me. So I think from my view, it would be the matching of the learner's knowledge with the knowledge that defines a field. Does that get to that, or is it?
So it depends on their interest.
Not exclusively. It depends on what is the field that they're trying to become knowledgeable or competent in. If you want to be licensed as a doctor or a dentist, you have to duplicate the knowledge that experts in the field have. And you're not just the knowledge, but you have to duplicate the soft stuff. What does it mean to be a doctor, not just how to know what a doctor knows. Because we can listen to lectures online and watch different videos or tutorials on pharmaceuticals, and we could probably know what a doctor knows, but that doesn't mean that we have the knowledge that we are a doctor, because there's the mannerisms, the soft skills, the stuff the apprentice thinks, what the apprentice model does very well. That's a part of it.
How does the knowledge base get determined? I mean, who determines what the appropriate knowledge base is for any particular field, and how is that done?
Great question. I think it's like it is now. I mean, right now, who determines what the content of curriculum is, who determines whether a student passes that curriculum or not? Most universities are going to have in a department sort of a curricular committee or faculty senate that might have the responsibility for approving or at least commenting on new courses, new programs. So I think the same holds true in this model. It's not that one person stands up and says, this is what you have to know, this is the field. You do have to develop it in peer systems, which means you're going to have different schools of thought. So let's say you go to university here, you're going to have one view of technology. And then if you go to Athabasca University, you're going to have a different view of technology. But that's okay. The important thing is that the student recognizes when they begin to enter into this system, the Sagrado or at University of or Athabasca or University of Manitoba, they know what the definition of knowledgeability in that field means. So the faculty still determine it. But the faculty, the schools of thought, are in conversation with each other through peer-reviewed journals, through conferences as well. So it's not that even though Athabasca might have one view, that sits in isolation. They're shaping and sharing their views through peer systems as well.
And then the next question would be how.
And the last one.
How do you determine the level of incoming knowledge, the so-called assets that the student brings to the field?
Yeah.
No se escuchó.
How do you determine the assets, the knowledge that the student brings to the field?
That's harder to do because the fact is not all our knowledge is explicit like in a database. It's tied to experiences, and if somebody asks us, what do you know about this topic, we might not be able to answer the question, but if they give us a small context that we can connect it to, suddenly we can speak very knowledgeably about a topic. So in that regard, I've seen a few attempts, where you're trying to personalize the information, the instructional experience by doing pre-tests of students. It's one model, not extremely effective, but it's one illustration. I think you can also look at what have they done in the past. If you have a learning portfolio, an e-portfolio that students create in their programs starting from school on, that gives you another perspective or a way in. What you can also do is once they've started the system, by observing how they interact with each other, the kind of knowledge they share, that also starts to serve as a framework that you can then use for additional analysis to personalize and adapt. So it's not that you analyze once and assess the learner once and then base everything on that. Each action they take contributes to the assessment of that learner. So they might come into our program and we might know very little about them because maybe they didn't do a portfolio. One student we know very little about, another student comes in and we know a lot about them by their digital footprint. Over time, though, we will get to know more about the student that just came in. So we might say, well, we don't know much about you. We think you've got about, X number % competence in this field. Let's start you here. But then they start to interact and we say, oh, they actually know this and this and this. So we're continually evaluating and reevaluating what we know about them.
Okay, we do have one more question. No more questions for this group?
I'm curious to know, does this model applies to elementary education?
Yeah, there are, and it was a question that another group asked previously, and I say there are a group of individuals who are looking at the impact of network learning at the elementary level. People like Will Richardson is probably one of the more prominent ones, Chris Lehman. There's a video that Dan Meyer did at the TEDx conference in New York where he talks about math education specifically and the importance of moving past giving people, leading them to the answer and getting them to think things through. So I think there's a lot of illustrations of people who are doing it K-12 level. The challenge, though, is that there's a different power relationship between an educator in a K-12 system and the student than you have when you have, people who are age of majority, right? You have different rights and a different sense of personal control. So you want to be careful that you're aware of potential for those power imbalances at the K-12 level. And that learners need, at that level, different levels of support as well that they may not need once they get to be an adult learner.
I see, but when they get to the university, they have to have some basic skills that if they don't learn it over in high school or elementary school, they might not have that, what you mentioned, that interest in learning and a way of doing things and doing research, or even an interest, a defined interest, because sometimes freshmen start university without even knowing what they actually want to do.
Yeah.
So how do you?
Well, I think the difficulty in that is that you're asking sort of two questions there. One relates to, does the school system prepare people for university? That's the first question, and I hope they do, but I'm sure there are instances where they don't and where there's failures or shortcomings. The second question relates more so to, what do we do once they're there? And I think once they're there, we should be able to provide remedial resources, because let's say a student made it through high school, but let's say they're very poor skills in physics or a core subject that they need for the field they want to get into. The university should be able to understand that knowledge deficiency, or recognize that knowledge deficiency, and they should then be able to provide remedial resources, or to be able to provide support, additional learning resources before they begin taking the full program.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Go over there.